Peace, neighbors. What's poppin' with the population, man? It's your favorite neighbor, Dayron, aka Neighborhood. Welcome back to the greatest More Life show on the planet. And today we got a good one, man. Everyone's a good one, but we got a real good one today, man. What we talking about today, I feel like a lot of y'all deal with, man. A lot of y'all deal with. Some cases, I feel like a lot of y'all are overthinking it more than you should. Hopefully, it resonates with you enough to get back on the right path, fulfill your goals and becoming more self-sufficient. Because this, what I'm about to tell you, is one of those keys to becoming more self-sufficient and growing a healthy, good food forest / garden, agroforestry, all that. Hopefully, what I tell you guys today will get you in your bag out here with some good quality compost. Look at that compost. Look how black, nice, rich, full of microbe activity and all that. That's what this episode is about. It's the do's and don'ts of composting. As I be dropping my snippets or my videos on composting, I get a lot of questions about what's happening with the compost. The compost is too wet, or compost is too dry, or their compost is attracting a whole bunch of animals. You got your vultures flying around, you got your land dwelling animals such as your rats, your mice, possums, so forth. I've only been composting for about 2 years. And my very first compost batch that I made, I got it to break down within that 30 to 40 day time frame, which is not the norm. Absolutely not the norm, because the average time frame for most people, the compost to be ready to use is 3 to 6 months, some even 9. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Composting is something that you don't necessarily need a whole bunch of land for. You could do this on the porch. You could do this if you have a big yard. You could do this if you have a small area to work with. It doesn't matter. But if you're wondering why should you be composting, because you buy the compost anyway. So why not make your own? Because you know everything that's going in the compost that you're formulating and making and creating, and you know how nutrient dense it is. You can play with it and just put your whole touch to it, as opposed constantly having to buy this compost from sources who get lazy on us. They may have started out ethical, but then they just took the cheaper route and started adding bullshit in it, a bunch of fertilizers in it, and so forth. You don't need that to have a healthy garden growing. You could create a compost that is rich in organic matter, rich in microbe activity, rich in nutrients, that then you can feed the land. And the compost, and for those of you who don't know what compost is for, compost is basically a great way to reuse and recycle the nutrients that you're not using back into the land so that you can have healthier soil. This is how you regenerate the soil and make sure your trees is growing nice and healthy below, and getting that adequate amount of nutrients down below as well, so that you can then have a healthier, or continuously have a healthy offspring of this tree. And for those of you who don't know what the offspring is, the fruit, the stuff that you do eat. This is propaganda that goes around where soil in America is done for, it's cooked, is no longer good, has no nutrients. I will have a great debate for that argument. Commercial farming, cooked, over fertilized, there's a whole bunch of pesticides and all this other unnatural stuff that depletes the soil of microbe activity, poisons it with all the chemical use, and overtills it, which leads to it becoming more compact and so forth. But you and I, we don't have that problem. It doesn't take that much longer to actually regenerate the soil, repopulate the microbes in the soil, the worm activity in the soil, which will then lead to your trees being much healthier. Because if you don't have microbes in the soil, your trees will lack the nutrients, because the microbes break down the nutrients and offer it to your trees, for then your trees to intake and then make their own food and so forth. We know that whole process. And that is why you should be creating your own compost. That's the first step. Then after creating your compost, you get to the point where you never run out of compost. You always have a new compost working, so that you can constantly keep the process going. Similar to gardening, and then planting your off seasons right before you harvest whatever's in season, so that you can have a constant flow of food growing in your food forest, your garden, whatever you got going on. I think a lot of you guys are overcomplicating composting. It's really not that hard, and I'll give you that grace, because I was the same way. I was overthinking it. I was this and that, but I got my compost to break down within that 30 to 40 day time frame, and that's simply because the microbe activity was picked up in it. Now, I did make a lactobacillus bacteria for it, but you don't even need that. As I progressed in making my own compost, I realized I don't even need that because I wasn't even using that to my later compost and still was getting the same results. It breaking down within that 30, 40, 50-day time frame. You just need to make sure you are constantly keeping the flow of nitrogen and carbon base so that you can have that steady growth or have a great environment for microbes to populate in that compost, which will break down this organic matter, this food scrap, carbon, the leaves, the leaf mold, the nitrogen base, which is grass clippings and all that stuff. Again, as I always say this, more microbes, the faster it will break down, neighbors. Say that with me. The more microbes, the faster it will break down. Now, we're going to get into some do's and don'ts so that you can get back in your bag. After this video, you will be in your bag. You will be a compost legend out here in the neighborhood, man. Just like your favorite neighbor. You know what I'm saying? I'm passing the game to you. So let's get it. Now, I'm going to go through these do's and don'ts kind of in an unconventional way. Typically, people will go through do's and then they'll go through the don'ts. I have the don'ts followed behind the do's. So make sure you're staying locked in so that you can see the do's and don'ts for each one so that your compost can be looking nice and rich. When I say rich, I mean rich like this. So neighbors, one of my recent episodes, I showed you guys me making or starting a new compost. This compost base that I started this time was from an old mango tree stump that we had that we finally got shaved down. So instead of just wasting the wood chips here and just throwing them away, I decided, hey, why not turn this into compost? First things first, if your compost is too dry, that means you have too much of a carbon base. You want to have that equal balance between carbon and nitrogen. And when one of those is off, you're gonna see the problems that you're gonna have. Your compost has too much carbon. It's probably gonna be more on the drier side. So that means you need to add more nitrogen. If your compost has too much nitrogen, it's probably gonna be more wet. So you want to add more carbon. Slow down on adding that nitrogen and add more carbon. Now, as you guys can see, this is more of a hot compost that I got going on here. And if you feel it, it is heating up pretty nicely. I just have to add more nitrogen to this so that the whole entire outside of it can start to break down and not be as dry as it is. But yes, if you're dealing with dry ass compost, all you literally have to do is add more of a nitrogen base. Don't spend so much time watering it, just add more nitrogen. And that will indeed solve your problem of having that dry compost. And when I say nitrogen, all I mean by nitrogen is your green. Think of nitrogen and carbon as colors. Nitrogen is going to be your green, which is your green leaves, your grass clippings, food scraps, stuff of that nature. Your carbon base is going to be your brown. Your cardboard, your wood chips, brown leaves, stuff of that nature. All I'm doing to moisten this up, I'm just going to add grass clippings just like that. Now, I'm not going to do that all in this video. I just want to get to explain it, but you're just taking grass clippings, cover this whole thing with grass clippings, and I'm going to shovel some grass clippings inside as well. Look at this beauty. Look how nice and broken down it's looking. Breaking down quick, the difference between those two composts that I showed you guys, this one is more of a hot compost. I don't really add anything to it other than grass clippings. This one I add food scraps into it. But being that I got the micro populating in here, food breaks down pretty fast so it doesn't give it time to rot. Now, number two, if they're not dealing with dry ass compost, they're dealing with wet compost. Like I stated a little bit earlier, if your compost is too wet, that means you have too much nitrogen overpowering your compost. Slow down on the nitrogen. Don't add no more grass clippings and up the carbon. If your compost is looking wet and soggy, slow down on the nitrogen. Start adding more wood chips, or if you have some cardboard laying around, or you can go get some good cardboard, whatever. Just add that brown to it so it can soak up and get that good perfect balance to that nitrogen base. And don't water it too much. When you have your compost, you could start off watering your compost, but don't overwater your compost, because when your compost is wet and it's soggy, that means your compost is starting to get those anaerobic conditions. And that's why it's not going to break down. You're basically creating a oxygen-less environment for the microbes and the worms, and they're not going to thrive there. They need oxygen to be flowing through the compost in order for them to populate and do their thing, neighbors. Want the compost to be aerobic, not anaerobic. You feel me? Anaerobic means, for those of you who don't know, means that it's lacking oxygen. Typically, the bottom of your compost is more so going to be slightly anaerobic, because if you water it every week or so, if you're not properly flipping your compost, typically the bottom having more of anaerobic conditions is going to be a little bit more wet down there. Your compost will still have life in it, because the microbes are moving through or populating an area where it's moist but not wet. Same thing for your worms. The worms are working their way in the compost, and they're going past the anaerobic part of the compost, or the part where it's wet and just lacking oxygen, and they're gonna move up to the place where it's moist. They don't want to be where it's wet, they want to be where it's moist. That's where they will populate the most at. Now, number 3 on the list, you're dealing with animal problems. Like, you're having a whole bunch of rodents, vultures, whatever the case may be, around the neighborhood because they smell this rotten ass food. Now, this kind of aligns with the too much nitrogen part, but it's still its own case. Now, typically when you having an animal problem when you're composting, because you're adding too much food. Now, if your food is not breaking down pretty quickly, that means that the microbes just ain't populating in the compost like they should be. They're not doing this thing. So you gotta hold off on the food scraps, and you gotta start upping and getting that base right with that nitrogen and that carbon, so that you can up the microbe activity. Some may say, well, food scraps is nitrogen. You're right, but there's a difference between having a base of grass clippings for your compost as opposed to food. Food is going to decay and rot. Grass clippings are going to break down, whilst accelerating the microbe activity, because it adds another source of nutrients. It's a primary nutrient source for microbes, and it accelerates the decomposition of your compost, enabling the temperature of the compost to rise. It forms proteins and enzymes for microbes to grow. That's why, typically if you ever watch anybody else that is good on compost or any composting vids, and they say breaking it down quickly, you gotta add more nitrogen, because the more nitrogen, the quicker it's gonna break down. But you gotta have a yin and yang to your compost. You don't want to have an overload of nitrogen and no carbon, because it's gonna be more on the wet side, and it's gonna create those anaerobic conditions. You don't want to have too much carbon, because then it's gonna be dry as hell. And you don't want to start your compost on just food, because of what? You're gonna invite scavengers, you know what I'm saying, your rats, your rodents, and you're gonna be like that lady in my comments, or that man or lady in the comments talking about she's just seen a whole bunch of rats in the neighborhood. Listen, I don't have those problems, and I hope you don't have those problems either. And if you do, make sure you're taking heed to what I'm saying, so that you can get rid of this problem, neighbors, because you are inviting them. A lot of us think that they just move in, and no, but we're inviting them. We're inviting them. And I'm not saying, exterminate all the rats and rodents and all that, and because certain of these rodents or certain animals can really play a huge part in your food forest. Like, say for instance, if you have animals on your food forest or whatever, possums will help get rid of ticks in your yard, that form, or whatever the case may be. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying just invite possums or whatever the case may be, but these type of animals will help get rid of, food scraps that are rotting or whatever, and they'll get rid of the pesky bugs. You know what I'm saying? So you gotta have a good relationship with nature at its height too. You can't just cancel out nature. But you, my friend, are inviting these things in by starting your compost off with decaying food. That's only a recipe for scavengers to just tap in, because that's what they do. They scavenge. They eat what's rotten and breaking down. That's a lot of these animals' purpose, to make sure that stuff doesn't go to waste. They come through, they get all the garbage, the waste. Now, your carbon base. Why is carbon or your browns so important to your compost? Because it provides an essential energy fuel. It's energy for your microbes, your microorganisms, and your worms, your mycelium, or your mushrooms, to say the least, populating in this beautiful compost to make it more nutrient dense. You don't necessarily have to start off with worm castings. I have never used worm castings in my compost, and I still somehow start to get hundreds of, maybe thousands of worms in my compost, and that's because I keep a good base of carbon in my compost. When I see it's getting a little bit too wet, I put more cardboard in there, or some wood chips, or some brown leaves in there, and I shovel it in and I flip it and make sure that's even throughout the compost. Now, if some of you guys are seeing a lot more mold growing or forming in your compost, that is a good thing. They are only there to help add. That's part of what I'm referring to when I'm talking about microbes. I'm talking about mold, the fungi, the mycelium, the microorganisms. That all kind of case in the same thing. And mold is not a bad thing. Sometimes we gotta change our mentality. Mold is there to break down the hard proteins that the microbes can't necessarily break down like that, or it's harder for them to break down. And then once they break that down, then the microbes go crazy, the worms go crazy, the mycelium goes crazy. Typically see more mold growing or formulating when you add in more food scraps. When you see more food scraps, which is a nitrogen source, you'll see more of that mold populating in your compost. But it's not going to be of detriment to your compost. It's only helping break down those hard to break down proteins. Now, I gave you guys it all, man. I gave you the game. Went over everything. Remember, if it's too dry, add some nitrogen. If it's too wet, add some carbon. Both these sources are going to populate the worms via the carbon, or the microbes via the nitrogen, or food scrap. And this is all fuel for the microbes. So the more fuel you feed the microbes, the more they populate. And the more they populate, the faster your compost breaks down. So now, what was once 3 months, 6 months, 8 months for you to wait for this compost to break down is now 30 days, 40 days, 50 days. It's gonna come like that. And that's how you never run out of compost. That's how you keep it coming, neighbors. You know what I'm saying? You keep it coming and you keep it thumbing, you heard? That's how we keep it rocking, man. I gave y'all the game, neighbors. Hopefully after this episode, you have became a master at composting. Stop thinking so much, neighbors. Stop thinking and just compost. Not that hard, neighbors. You're dealing with two sides of chemistry: nitrogen, carbon. Marry the two, your compost will break down. And then you'll get it to the point where the microbes is populating so much, the worm activity, the mycelium activity is populating so much that then you could throw the food in there. Now you're not getting rid of food. Now you're not wasting food. You're turning this waste into black gold. Now you're adding to the land. You're feeding life into the soil. You're regenerating the soil so that you can then directly plant into your soil and still have nourishing offspring of whatever you're growing. You know what I'm saying? This is how we do it, neighbors. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be a master composter after this, neighbors. There shouldn't be a reason. Look at this black gold right here, man. This is what I call the black gold, man. This is the black gold project, neighbors. Let's get to it to get through it, man. This video helped you just think less and lock into your composter skills that you ain't even know you had. Make sure to do your neighborhood due diligence. Give this episode a like. Make sure to comment neighborhood in the comments below. If you want to start your food forest journey but don't necessarily know where to start, make sure to hit that link in the description below at nhgrowers.com. We're growing our seed bank and we offer seasonal herbs for you to help you along your healing journey or start your food forest. Let's get outside. Let's get to growing and composting so our health could get to glowing. Just grow your own / support true righteous local growers like myself, or continue to rely on the broken system to supply you their own. We all know what they supplying. It ain't some nutrient dense compost like this. You feel me? They want us constantly dependent on them for all this stuff. But we are no longer going to depend on the system. We're going to depend on ourselves and depend on each other, depend on community, depend on the neighborhood. That's what it's about, neighbor. Peace, love, light, much healing to you and yours. It's your favorite neighbor, Dayron, aka Neighborhood. See you on the next one. Yeah, they.